Most of the big international banks have been shut out of Iran. It's part of the sanctions. But for the banks that still can find their way in there, still can find a way to do some business, they're actually making some money off this. Meg Coker is with us in Abu Dhabi. Meg, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thanks.
So who's still doing business? What banks are still doing business in Iran?
Well, there's not a whole lot of name brand banks that we would recognize from either the US or Europe, but there are a lot of banks still in countries that are historically quite close to Iran. We have some Russian banks that are still involved, Chinese banks, Indian banks still involved, because there are a lot of companies in those countries that still have billions of dollars of legitimate business to do with Iran. There's still a lot of things that you can sell to Iran that don't fall under UN or EU or US sanctions.
Right, and I think people hear sanctions, they may not quite understand what's going on. A lot of this is aimed right at the financial business in Iran, right?
Right. I mean, the way that the U.S. has designed its sanctions net against Iran to try and change that country's nuclear policies is to cut its financial institutions off of the international bank transfer and clearing networks that exist. So it's now illegal if you're a U.S. or EU company to do business with the Iranian central bank or most major Iranian banks. However, the types of business that are still legitimate are trades that have to do with food and commodities and medicine.
And these banks, the banks that are in there, they're charging a nice little premium for this business, aren't they? That's the real deal. That's the real part of this story here, is that they're actually making good money because of the squeeze.
Very good money. I mean, the fees that they're charging in order to conduct legitimate business is somewhere in the range of 6 to 8% above the normal fees that you'd have to charge due to currency exchanges or something like that. And 8% off of $100 million, even $50 million deal. That's nothing to laugh at.
Now, how long do we expect this to go on? How long do we expect this situation to persist? I know that's such an open-ended question, right? But is there any kind of timeline on the sanctions?
Well, there are sanctions that are coming into effect later on this summer that are going to make it very, very restrictive to buy any of Iran's oil or energy products. And that's going to cut a lot of European companies that are still doing business and have longstanding business trade with Iran from doing those deals after the summer. But there's still lots of companies in China, Iran, and I'm sorry, in India and in Russia that are still doing business in Iran. And until the UN takes up those very restrictive sanctions that the European Union and the US have installed, that there really is no reason for those countries and those companies not to keep working and doing business in Iran.
How much disclosure are these companies doing about what they're doing in Iran to investors?
Well, a lot of the companies that are still doing trade and these banks that we've highlighted in our story today, they're not publicly traded, and they're so far off of the main path of financing circles that not many people have heard of them. It doesn't, and they don't have business in the U.S., for example. So there's no reason for this second-tier Russian bank that's called First Russian Czech Bank, and this small second-tier Chinese bank that we've named the Bank of Kunlun. There's no reason for them to have or need any transparency because they're not involved with U.S. trade. They don't make their name doing dollar-denominated business, but instead they're working with local currencies like the Russian ruble or the Chinese yuan in order to deal with Iran and stay out of that sanctions web that the U.S. has tried to painstakingly put in place.